Okay.
Hello, I'm Alexander von Welczeck, and this is Annette's story. We're telling my mother, Annette von Welczeck's story. This is 1954 to 1959, when Annette begins to spread her wings and discover the big wide world. Annette, I think in 1954, your first experience going overseas or out of the country was to France.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, when Director Spicer found me this place in Avignon, I was so excited. I went home. I had to go all the way from Munich to Münster, which is a whole day on the train. And I told my mother about this, and she was very upset. And she says, "You are not going to France, das Land der Sünde," she said, the country of sin. And I said, "Mother, this is so ridiculous." So she was very much against it. But somehow I had enough money for the train, and I did go on the train against her will to go to Avignon. And of course I thought a lot about her in the train, but at the same time I couldn't go back. I had to do this. So I arrived in Avignon and at the main station, but then this hotel I had to go to was in the suburb. It's called Villeneuve-les-Avignon. It was right across the Pont du Neuf, which is very famous in Avignon, and I had to cross that bridge, and there I arrived in this little village, which is very close to Avignon. It's almost part of it. But there was an old cloister, and there was an old door, and right in the shadow of a really old church with a big tower and all that. And I had no idea where I was. I landed there. I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. I opened the door. It was even squeaky, a really old door. And then when I came inside, it opened up to marble floors and glass and fabulous, a big lobby, and that was looking into gardens that used to be the gardens of the monks, with those passages where they pray, with tennis courts and pool and everything. And so I introduced myself to Monsieur Miele, the owner, and he was very happy to see me. And then I was introduced to the cold cuisine, and that's where I had to work. I was supposed to work the kalte Küche, they call it, cold cuisine where they make the dessert and the hors d'oeuvres and stuff. So I didn't get to the front desk. That's what I wanted, but I didn't get that. They told me I had to go through all the different departments, yeah. And so, okay, it was all right. Then they showed me where I had to sleep. So it was one of those wings where all the monks used to sleep, one of those big old hallways on the second floor, very old, but I had a very nice bedroom at the end of this hallway. But that whole hallway had about 10 bedrooms, and there were all the cooks and the waiters and everybody. I was the only girl at the end. That was really, at first I was a bit frightened, but then I had a big key, I could lock my door, and nobody, so once in a while I had a knock, but I never opened my door, never. But in the evenings we would sing together. It was very much fun. I mean, they were very international. They were young people that were in the hospitality business from all over the world. There were another few German guys, mostly French, of course, Italian. One was from Nice, from the Riviera, and from Le Havre. There was a very nice young man from Le Havre, I remember. And so they were from all over. And so that in itself was an experience to live with all these young, but they were all men, but I never got involved with any of them. I must say that in my honor. And because I remember how difficult it was to get out of my first engagement. I said, I never get involved with a man again. That was deep ingrained in my soul. Never get involved again. And I was really eager to learn a profession and to be something. I wanted to be my own person. So anyway, I did that. And after 6 months, of course, I had learned quite a bit. And but then I felt after 6 months the French I learned was really the patois, so to speak. That's, not the proper French. And there was no school I could learn it. And I didn't want to learn patois French. So I thought, I'm going to go to Paris, and that's where I can go to a school. And of course, Avignon was getting a little small. Even though the boys would take me on their motorcycles in the evening, after work we would go on a motorcycle to the city of Avignon and would go dancing. It was a very different type of atmosphere than I was used to in Germany. It was more a southern type of music. It was very much, I don't know, it was more nostalgic. It was a very different experience, but lovely. But on the motorcycle, night home again, to bed early in the morning at 6 o'clock, I had to be at work again. So that all in itself, Avignon was a lot of fun, but I wanted school. So I told Monsieur Miele, the owner, I said, Monsieur Miele, I'm going to go to Paris. He said, you can do that. And I said, why not? I can just go to Paris. And he said, no, you have a contract with me. I said, if you go to Paris, you get deported. And I thought to myself, who would find a little girl in Paris, I didn't take that contract that serious, which was, today I know it was wrong. I did wrong, but I didn't realize it at that time. Today, having had a business on my own, he sponsored me and all that, that was the wrong thing to do, but I didn't realize it. So I forgive myself. So I thought about it a few days, and I said one day to him, I said, Monsieur Miele, I'm going. And so he gave me my paycheck, and I took the train to Paris. Now I arrived in Paris. I didn't know a soul in Paris. I arrived in the Gare du Sud. Paris has like 4 stations. The Sud, the Nord, what is the very famous one? Montparnasse, the Montparnasse train. Anyway, then I was at the station, and I went into all the stations. Always the train stations always have a coffee shop, and I had my breakfast there. And a very handsome young man came and asked me what I was doing in Paris, because he could see probably that I just arrived. And I said, well, I want to go to school here, and I want to learn French. I couldn't speak in the meantime enough French. I'd had some French in school, and then of course what I learned in Avignon. So I told him I want to go to school, perhaps get a job or something. And then he said to me, well, you have to go to the Alliance Française, he says. And I didn't know about it. And then he said, I tell you something. If you come back in 2 hours here he was a young waiter, but also a student apparently. And he said, if you come back, I'll drive you there. I was always perhaps a little naive in life. I trusted him. I was back in 2 hours with my suitcase, and there he was, and he had that little duck, that typical French, that old duck. And he brought me to the Alliance Française. He was very kind. He brought me inside there, and he helped me. And he said, when you have the school, you sign up, and then here are all the rooms you can rent. It's very cheap. You share your rooms with other students. And then he left. He said, au revoir, and he left, and I never saw him again. Wasn't that lucky? Mm-hmm. Very nice. I had a couple times luck like that. And so I signed up for the school. And then I looked up a couple addresses, and there was Avenue du Maine. There was a place that had only girls there, like half a dozen girls, I think 4 rooms. And the cost was right. It was all in francs. Today would be paying, I don't know, like $30, $40, I think it was francs. A franc had, how should I say, a dollar had like 20 francs. It was a different altogether. Sure. I remember only the Deutschmark had, did they have Deutschmark? Yeah, Deutschmark. The Deutschmark had 8 francs, but the dollar, of course, was very different. So I found that room, and it was wonderful. There were like 4 rooms. Every room had like 3 beds in it, and 1 little shower. And the shower was a bit of a disaster on top of it. But we were girls from all over the world. I shared my room with a Finnish girl, with a Spanish girl. Then at one time I had to change again. There were a couple German girls and Swiss girls. and Swedish. They came from all over the world. We just never had Americans. The Americans were too rich for us. Whenever I saw an American, we looked up to them. Oh my God. It's like today you would look at Elizabeth Taylor, you know. We had, I wouldn't say respect, but we sort of, what would you call that? Admiration, but also we were in awe. A little bit in awe of Americans. We didn't dare to go to the bars where the Americans went. We went to our bars where the wine only cost 10 cents or 20 cents, you know. So anyway, this was a wonderful experience. In the mornings I went, it was 3 blocks away. I went to the school and to learn better French. And in the afternoons I was there, and all we girls exchanged stories, and it was a great fun. It was just great fun.
Now, did you also work while you were in France, or was it?
Well, I tried. Then first, of course, I lived off that money. In Avignon, I never spent a penny, right? I made a little money there, but that money was enough to support me for a while, right? And I was trying to find a job. And, you know, you meet people. When I went to the sidewalk cafes, you always meet people. And somebody was there, he said, oh, there's a man who wants some help in a hotel at the reception. So I went there, and there was the Phoenix Hotel near the Place d'Etoile, and this man was married to a German woman and had a child, and he wanted to go to Germany for a few weeks, and he said, yeah, he gave me the job right away. Somehow he trusted me. And it was a small hotel with only like 50 or 60 rooms. But with this thing, you know, with the telephones, where you have to push all that stuff in there, which I had no idea what that was, how that worked. And he showed it to me one afternoon, and he said, you come tomorrow morning. I think I had to be there at 8 o'clock. I was there at 8 o'clock. I took the metro at 8 o'clock. And there they said, au revoir, and he left with his family. That phone kept ringing, and I didn't know what to do. This was a disaster. People were very mad at me, you know. I pushed that, but at the end, a couple of days it took me, and I figured it out. It worked after a few days, but I had a few very upset customers. But I have to say this too, which is very Parisian, and I have to say it. I have never told my mother, but I have to tell this. There also would come in people that would rent for a couple hours, right? There were several chambermaids, and there was it was an older man. He was in charge of taking care of all the rooms, right? I was just sitting at the front desk. And the owner did tell me, if people come in that just want a room for a couple hours, you can keep that money. It was my money then. Yeah. And I thought, I was always hoping people would come in. And there were very strange people coming in there, you know, women that looked very funny and so on. But then they would just stay always in the back, and the men came and to have the room, only pour 2 heures, you know. Okay, I was acting like I was very suave, and I gave him the key. I took the money, and I kept that money. The other one that was totally with the rooms, that was I couldn't do it, and I wouldn't have to cheat him anyway, right? But that was all under control. The room was rented out for the night. I forgot how much that was, but the one for a couple hours, it was like 10 or 20. I forgot the price, but $10, $20 or francs, and so I made some pretty good money there. So I only was there for 4 weeks, and then they came back, and he was happy. I did a good job, apparently. And I went back to my place again on Avenue du Maine, and went back to school. And then my money ran out again, and then I thought I have to do something. And then au pair. I thought I'm going to be an au pair. And then I went on several appointments or interviews for au pair, and I met a very lovely lady. She lived on General Leclerc. On General Leclerc, it's a big avenue, not far away from Avenue du Maine, and Madame de Charita, she had 4 little children, and they paid me, I think, 60 francs a month, and I don't know how to compare that to today. Probably if I would get $100 today. And then I would get a room. So I had to move out of my lovely apartment with all my good friends. And I got the room, the Bonn. In Paris, people have apartments, you know, they're flats. But then they were all very well off. He was an engineer, very well off, these people. Not rich, but well off. With 4 little children. And my room was on the highest floor. So that was, but I couldn't go with the main entrance. I had to go the back entrance at the circular staircase to the 8th floor, I think it was. When I came back from school, I had to go up there. And that's where everybody had the Bonn, we're all living up there. And there was one of the famous French toilets too. There was not a regular toilet, that was disgusting. But I want to get into it. Was disgusting, you know. I had never seen anything like it, but that's how it was. For the Bonn, that was good enough. But I had 4 lovely children. There was Etienne and Gaston and Eclair. Claire was it, not Eclair. Claire, and I forgot the youngest. He was just a baby. He was only 6 months old. So I could go to school in the mornings to Alliance Française, and at 2 o'clock I had to be there and took care of the 4 children. I took the little baby to the Jardin de Luxembourg. It was very close to the Jardin, and the Boulevard Raspail is right there, and Boulevard Michel. It's a Quartier Latin. So this was really nice. The kids, little Claire was a little fresh always, but she was cute, little Claire. And I remember young men always, they knew that we were Bonds, you know, that we were taking care of children. But there were a lot of Tunisians, Algerians, and Moroccans.
Oh, so you had another boyfriend while you were in
No,
Paris?
they hit on you because they could see that I was not a French girl, and they didn't dare to hit on a French girl because the French girl knew how to defend themselves.
So when you lived in Paris, as a young woman, you didn't have any boyfriends?
Oh yeah, that came then. I was already with Mrs. Charita. I went to one of the dances. I met girls, of course, at what was the school again? Alliance Française, and we went dancing one Saturday night for the university, for the Sorbonne, because I took some classes there once in a while in between, and so a man, we were 4 girls, and a man tapped me on my shoulder and he wanted to dance with me. And I felt very intrigued. I mean, they were all 4, and I turned around and he was quite handsome, a little older. And I danced with him, and we danced all night, and he was wonderful. And then he brought me home, and I found out he was a professor. And he brought me home, and then we made a date for the next Saturday. And he picked me up. He also had one of those little French cars, and he picked me up. And then, we became a little closer. And then he took me he was a professor at the Sorbonne for science, what was it called again? Research de science. It had something to do with research, you know? And his name was Raymond. He was a Frenchman, but he always had lived in Beirut, you know, in Lebanon. Yeah. Very interesting man, but he was like 40 years old, and I was just 20, right? 21, I think, in the meantime.
So how long in total did you stay in Paris? And then after Paris, where did you go?
Well, okay, I finished the schooling there, and with Raymond that lasted. Now I have to tell, Raymond introduced me, that I have to tell, introduced me to the beautiful French life, because on Sunday mornings we went on the Champs-Élysées for a beautiful walk. He bought me a flower, and then we walked the Champs-Élysées like a most beautiful couple, like we were movie stars. And then he took me to the most fabulous restaurant, and we ate really French style, you know, which I wasn't used to. I was used to sauerkraut, right? No, not quite, but anyway. So that was a fantastic time, I mean, with Raymond. But then one day I thought, oh my God, this man is much too old. I could never bring him home. My mother would never accept it. I still had respect for my mother. Mother would never accept him. So we somehow resolved this whole relationship. And then one day my sister Winnie got in touch with me, and she said, Annette, we have the Messe now in Hannover, and they need people there. They translate, and that since you're so good in French now, we need people there, and you probably could find a really good job in Hannover, where you can make some real money. I wasn't making money, right? So I thought about it, and then one day I took the train and went back home for a few days, and then from there to Hannover, that has a very world, you know, the World Messe.
The World Industry Fair.
Yeah,
I think the world's
yeah,
largest fair in the meantime.
Yeah. My sister Winnie had there a job at the Marsh, what is it called? Marsh, yes. She was the executive housekeeper there. And I was then got the job at the Georgspalast, at the front desk there. And so I was called in many times they had many different cafes and restaurants. There was a big complex there with many different restaurants, right, and cafes, and was called to translate here and there because people came from all over the world to Hanover, and I actually was very useful as a translator. So that was a good experience, and one day, of course, a man came to the front desk and enjoyed talking French, and of course I enjoyed showing off with my French, and we had wonderful conversations, and in no time he invited me, and I had actually a little affair with him. His name was Hans. But Hans was also a little older. He had been in the war, and he had been even a prisoner, but he was a prisoner of war because he was fighting the Nazis at some point. He helped a lot of Jewish people going to England. And he was a very interesting man and very international. And so I was about, I don't know how long I was in Hannover, perhaps 7 months or so. And I said to Hans, I want to go to England one day. My English is very poor. And I think English is more important than French even. And he says, I have to go on a business trip to England, he said to me. And why don't you come along? Of course I did that. I never told anybody about this. I went with him to London, and then we stayed at the house of some Jewish people he had helped to escape. So I first thought always he probably told me stories, but he didn't. All these Jewish people, they were praising him, how wonderful he was, and helped a lot of people during the war to escape the Nazis. And this was a wonderful family. They were in the meantime very successful again. They lived in Hampstead Heath, and we were invited to a few dinners there, and then they gave me a taxi one day. They arranged a car for me to have the beautiful tour of London, you know, to go to, what is that famous street, Bond Street, which is where all the rich stores are in England, in London. So they arranged all that for me, and we went to beautiful clubs. So it was quite interesting. So I flew back with Hans again, and I said to Winnie, I only stay here a few more weeks in Hanover, and then I will go to London. But in the meantime, in Hanover, I have to talk about that too. In Hanover, when I started working there, you don't get a room. There was such a shortage of rooms. I got a little bit of a room at one point once, and then I stayed with my sister once, and they kicked me out. I stayed actually one night at the Bahnhof. I could not find a room. There was no rooms. And I couldn't stay at Winnie's. They would have kicked her out if they would have known I would stay another night in her room. They said, there's a room for... People were so uptight after the war. They were the German people had gone through so much, you know. They were mean. They were really mean. So I was kicked out there, and I stayed one night at the Bahnhof with all these bums. Can you imagine when I think about it today? So, but then I did find a room, but you could never have a visitor or anything like that. But luckily, Hanover only lasted 6 months, so it wasn't a big deal. And I'd saved my money. I made good money there, so I saved my money. And that money I used then, after I had been with Hans for 2 weeks, or probably just a week, in London, I quit my job. And my mother came in the meantime to Hanover, and she found out about Hans, and she made me come home with her. I had to come home. It's the second time. First, now I had to come home. Because he had been divorced. Oh, that's the other thing, he had been divorced twice. Hans was, that was absolutely no-no in Germany. Hans was divorced twice. So I spent a week in our house in Willen and arranged my trip to England. And Heinz, of course, my brother Heinz, in the meantime, he drove a Porsche already. Business was good. Father had been dead for a few years. He did what he wanted, right? He was in his Porsche. He brought me. Then I said, I'm going to England, and I arranged a trip from, what is it called? What's this town? Famous for going, there's a ferry going to
From Dover?
To Dover, going to Dover. From
Holland, or?
Yeah, it's Holland, and it's in Holland, Belgium, da oben.
Rotterdam?
No, it's small, it's a small harbor.
Calais?
No.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
Later on I will think about it. I forget names lately, I guess it has to do with my age.
I think your memory is amazing, all the details.
Yeah, but names sometimes are difficult.
Okay, it's all right. Let's keep going.
Antwerpen.
Antwerpen.
From Antwerp. I remember Heinz brought me there. We took a room in a hotel. He didn't even come home all night because Antwerp is famous for their nightclubs. He did night clubbing. He came home in the morning to bring me to the boat, right? To the ferry. That was my brother Heinz. My brother Heinz was a big playboy, yeah. He loved a good time. So he brought me to the ferry, and so I took the ferry from Antwerp to Dover, right? But on this ferry was lots of young people. And we were all sitting on the floor. You couldn't even find a seat. We were sitting on the floor, and I was sitting next to a young couple. It was a young German girl, and the boy, I believe he was from Persia. And I talked to them, and they said, oh yeah, we have been in London, it's so wonderful, and so on. I said, I don't even have a room. Do you know where I can stay, and so on? Oh, they said, no problem. It's full of students from all over the world. You come with us. Well, I trusted them. They were very nice young people. I trusted them. So when we arrived in Dover, we took the train to London, and we arrived at Victoria Station, right? And then in Victoria Station, we took then the tram to Hampstead Heath again, which was funny, which I had been there before, but I barely remembered it. So I went with them, and in Hampstead Heath there, they went from one house to another, because outside there were signs, whom rooms for rent, for just one night or so, right? Mm-hmm. These were widowed old ladies that had a nice apartment or a house, but they wanted to make a little bit extra money. And I remember the old lady coming to the door with a cigarette. I'd never seen a cigarette in her mouth, sort of schlepping herself. And, they called us honey, and, all these names. And so they said, yeah, you can have a room for like 2 shillings, it was a few shillings only. But we had to sleep on the floor in blankets. Mm-hmm. In the floor of the living room in blankets, like here you would be. And the 3 of us slept there on the blankets. And the next morning, this young couple told me, so because they had the experience, they said, now you just go here, they showed me the street where there were all these wonderful old English villas that had signs on their rooms for rent, but also they took students in, right? So I went to one of these houses, and the first one was perfect. It was a house that had probably 20 bedrooms, and there was a couple that rented all these out, but this had all really rooms with beds on it. And I got a room there for like 20 shillings. It was very cheap, 20 shillings for the month, 30 shillings. I do not know the value of the money anymore, it has so changed. But it's cheap. And so I got a room with a French girl and an English girl, but we had really beds, a tiny room, one bed, and the shower was next door. And we got along very well. And they teased me once in a while because I was being from Germany. We had lost the war, and it was not that long time after the war. And when I didn't get up Saturday morning, they said, gee, there was a German girl here before you. She would get up at 6 o'clock and wash all her laundry here. I said, I'm sorry, there are some different German girls too. And next door were a bunch of Italian boys, and on Saturdays they cooked pasta for us. It was like a new thing. Pasta and sauce. Oh my God, this was fabulous. We had, on these tiny rooms, we had parties, but all very innocent. We never did, there was never anything like, you know, shady going. Parties, and $1, no, wine that cost 2 shillings or something, so cheap, for Spanish wine. Spanish wine was the cheapest.
So then you started school, or what was happening now when you were in London?
Well, I was in this boarding house, and then I inquired where there would be a school where, you know, foreigners learn proper English, and they told me about LTC of Oxford Street, and I signed up for that. So I took the tube out of Hampstead Heath to Tottenham Court Road, which was a station, and a couple blocks from there was the LTC of Oxford. I signed up for it, and I forgot how much it cost, but I could swing it. I had enough money to do all that. And we had a very handsome young teacher there, the English teacher, and I was mostly fascinated with students that were sitting in front of me. They were Greek. I had never seen more handsome men, these dark-haired, beautiful haircuts. I couldn't take my eyes off. They looked like Greek gods, all these young men. There were 3 or 4 of them. Anyway, but they were very nice young men all. So one day they told, let's go dancing. And in London, you can go dancing all day long, which we did. After school, we had to buy to eat there somewhere, and we went dancing all afternoon. And it was just all fun and very innocent. I don't think you could have such a good time today anymore. It was just wonderful. So I did that for a while, and then of course my money was running out. And then my French roommate was leaving, again going back to France, and she says, Annette, you can have my job. I make £10 a week washing dishes in a small restaurant in the neighborhood. And because I could not get a proper job because I even asked the owner, he was a very nice man, and I said, I want to be a waitress. He says, no, you can do that, they catch you, then you get deported, right? After all, I went to London again. I was in what you would call today an illegal. I was an illegal. Trump would kill me today, right? So I was an illegal. So he said, I can give you the job as a dishwasher. And that's what I did. I washed dishes in the back and got £10 a week. Can you imagine? It's true. And there was always a young boy, he was Italian boy, who was a waiter, because apparently he had the papers. And he annoyed me. He would bring me to the place where I lived, but he always bothered me too much because I didn't want to do what he wanted to do. And he said one day to me, you must be a lesbian, he said to me, and I felt so hurt. I said, I barely knew what that was. I knew basically what it was. And I thought, oh my God, that couldn't be right, you know? You see, that is what you confront as a young girl when you don't know too much about life. And that's why I couldn't be a lesbian. I've had I was a few times in love, but he was mean. So this is ever since I was very worried always about Italian boys. So, because I think it's unfair, you know, it's unfair to tell a young girl like something like that where you hardly know what to do with it. And anyway, I finished there, and then I met Antonio. Antonio was in my class. Antonio came from Venezuela. And Antonio had a big Mercedes, the biggest Mercedes at that time, because he was a rich boy from Venezuela. He was in the oil business, and he went to Germany, bought the biggest Mercedes, and he went to my school. And we started dating, and he took me out to nice dinners, and he was really very nice. He was a very gentle, nice kind of young man. And then I also met another Spanish boy, and I had a girlfriend, Ingrid, from Germany. And then one day we said, God, the fog in London was terrible. This was, I think, the end of March by that time, and you could hardly see yourself. It was so cold and so foggy, and we all said, God, let's get the hell out of here. So Antonio said, well, why don't we all go to Spain? And God, Spain, I would love to go to Spain. And then this other young Spanish boy, he came from Barcelona. He said, yeah, we go to Spain. And, you know, I thought first we could even stay with his family all. So Ingrid and I said, oh yeah, we go with you. So we drove his beautiful Mercedes all through England, back to Dover again, took the ferry and arrived in France. And then they said, we don't know how to drive in Europe. And I had to drive. I drove that beautiful car all the way through France, through the Pyrenees, into Barcelona. And in Barcelona, this young man, I forget, it was Pedro or something like that, he got us a room, Ingrid and I got a room right down old town of Barcelona, and Antonio stayed with his friend in their home, because he was from there. But we stayed in that old area, and it was Easter then. It was something I'd never seen before. They had these processions going through these old streets where people were carrying crosses and having chains on their legs and all that, because they are so religious. They thought they were bad, and they had to, they call it Buße, you know, I don't even know for Buße the English word for it. And they had to suffer to go to heaven. So we had a wonderful time though in Barcelona. And Franco was still in office at that time. Franco was in office, and then they told us, window down, and say, Franco down, and we did that, and they could have arrested us for that. We were daring young kids. We were, you know, silly really. But it was fun. We went to the Costa Brava for swimming. It was still a little cool at that time, April, right? And then my mother, I don't even know how we did that. My mother, who was so against France, and my sister Winnie, Frau Schlaps, the mother of my old boyfriend, and Uncle Joip, my uncle who spoke fluent French, who had been in the army all the time in France during the war, they all wanted to see Paris. And they said, Annette, you have to show us Paris. So we drove with the Mercedes then to Paris. They dropped me off, and the other three children, they went on back to London again. I don't even know where they went. I think they went back to England again. I stayed in Paris. And I met my family at the train exactly at the right time, station. At that time, we didn't phone each other. You had no, what is it here?
No cell phones, no internet?
No, nothing. Not
no
even, you
pay
couldn't,
phones even.
They didn't know. And we did that all by letters. It was writing. And yet I was at the exact time at the station when they came out of the train. I received them. I had made reservations at the Phoenix Hotel where I had worked that 1 month. And I had a beautiful room there, very close to the Place d'Étoile. And my mother, who was so against Paris, enjoyed it so much. And Winnie and Uncle Joip, and they all, we took a taxi, but we also took the metro, and I took them to the Folies Bergère, and we said, Mother, close your eyes because these girls don't have a top on. It didn't bother her. She had really changed. Then we went to the Lido, the very famous nightclub. We went to the Pied de Cochon, which was the most famous restaurant at the Marché that doesn't exist anymore. The Marché is where the market always was, where all the farmers came. It's like farmers market here. But can you imagine, that was the biggest thing in Paris, the Marché. And the Pied de Cochon was the most famous restaurant where they had the best onion soup in all of Paris. And so I treated my mother to French onion soup. Oh, she loved it in Paris. We went to the Louvre, we went to all the different museums, and we took a trip on the Seine River, and yeah, she really had a good time. And I forgot how many days we stayed, but then we took the train back to Germany, and I went home, and Mother was like a different person. She had seen Paris suddenly. I think she even used rouge suddenly. You know, Mother was, I think Paris did something to her. And so then my sister had arranged for me a job on the island of Sylt, which is, in the meantime, one of the most famous islands for vacationers. You know?
Yeah, very high-end.
Yeah.
Luxury island for Germany, right?
And Haus Runkel, she had been there for a season, and she said they need a receptionist there, but also like managerial receptionist. You know, did the office, you had to run the whole thing more or less. And I had an interview I went to Sylt, had an interview with Mrs. Nunn, Nettie Nunn was her name. She owned 3 hotels, and Haus Runkel was probably the number 1 on the island of Sylt at that time. And so we met, and she hired me right away. So I just went back home to pack my suitcase, get ready, and went back to Sylt, and I started my job. And of course, it was all a bit new to me. I had suddenly type letters and do things, I mean, more managerial, which I had never done before. But she was very patient with me, I think. You know, I was young enough, I learned fast, I think. And so we did that. I stayed with her like a month. She was with me in the Haus Runkel because she lived in there. And then after 4 weeks, she suddenly says, okay, I'm off, because she owns the Kur Hotel and the Haus Meeresblick. They were just next door, but they were bigger. And this was more exclusive. So she took off and she stayed there, and I was suddenly all alone in the Haus Runkel and really had to run the whole show more or less, right? I was part of the rooms also. This was just reception, getting the bills out and so on. And so we had really impressive guests there. I mean, names that were known all over the world, you know, very famous people. I don't want to mention names now because they were famous, you know, from Weitz to all these people. Udo Richter, I can mention. He was the most famous designer. He was a very lovely gay guy out of Berlin, and he came over with his buddies, and he would come to my office in the evenings. I wanted to talk for hours about, you know, philosophize. I wanted to go to bed. He had to talk about life, you know. Mm-hmm. And Rudolf Schock was always there. He was the most famous opera singers at the time in Germany.
Now, how long did you stay in Sylt, and what happened after Sylt?
Well, that season, you know, it's seasonal. So when the season was over, I had made very good money, and Mrs. Nunn had a way, she didn't pay us during the season because we had to work 7 days a week from 7 o'clock till the last guest went to bed. Mm-hmm. You know, my only time off was always from 12 till 2. That time I went to the beach. And the customers, there was famous, Sylt was very famous for the nude beaches. And all these people, the customers that stayed at our place, they all went to the nude beach. There was Dune 1, Dune 12, they all had their names. The dunes, that was the sand dunes, right? And then you had that open ocean there, the North Sea.
This is the famous German FKK lifestyle.
Yeah. So I was brought up so prude, right? And people would come into my office and tell me, but Annette, it's nothing to it. Come to us, you just 1-2 days and you feel like you're so free because you're in the sun and you feel so free. And well, it took me a few weeks to be sort of convinced. And yeah, I did go to the nude beach. At first I kept my stuff on, and then the first couple of days I was hiding at the beaches in Germany. They dig a big hole and they have these big baskets in there, you know, where you save yourself from too much sunshine. So I was hiding in the basket a few days, but it took me 1 day and 2 days and 3 days later suddenly I was off. I was a free person. You feel very free. You don't feel that you're naked. It's really a feeling. You have to experience it, you know. It was very nice. And a few months later, when I arrived there, I just got rid of everything, and all my customers were staying there. There comes Annette, and I took them all into the Brandung, you know, in the waves. Mm-hmm. We were just swimming, and it was such a, I would say, an experience with Mother Nature. That's what it was, the North Sea. You know, it's cold. The sea is cold, the sun is shining, the sea is cold, and then you are very free. And yeah, these people, they were old and young, mostly old, I would say, and very famous names. They all were at that beach. It was a great experience. Some Swiss people came, famous sort of, but they did that. They didn't do that in Switzerland. We had a couple French customers, but not that much.
So you were in Sylt, and after Sylt, I think you went maybe to Berlin, or what happened from there?
Well, no, there was in Berlin, yeah. When I was in Sylt, there was a very nice older couple. We called them always Onkel Heinrich. People were very informal, and even though they had money, they were very sophisticated. But on the island, they all were very, very informal. And Onkel Heinrich his name was Heinrich Schmidt. He had a factory in Berlin, very, very well known. And he said to me one day, Annette, he called me Annettchen, have you been in Berlin? I said, no, I always wanted to go to Berlin. I've been in Paris and London, but never in Berlin. He said, you have to see Berlin. And I think it was the last few months of the season. He spent always like 6 weeks in Kampen. Once the season came to an end, I got a letter with a ticket inside for a flight from Hamburg to Berlin as a guest of the company of Heinrich Schmidt. It's called Löwen. His company was called Löwen Heinrich. Machte Spirituals, Liköre and stuff. And so, God, I had free ticket. I'd never even had flown before, right? So I went with a ticket. I had the date. Everything was booked because he knew one. But his wife was a very lovely lady. They knew when the season was over. So I went to Hamburg with a train, and then I went to the airport, and I went to Berlin. When I arrived in Berlin, there was the biggest limousine waiting for me and brought me to the Kempinski Hotel. And there I had a wonderful room. There were baskets of fruit and flowers, and they treated me. They always thought of me as a directrice of that hotel. I thought myself of myself as a taking care of the hotel, right? I never thought of, but they looked at me in a different way. They thought, oh, die Direktorin, from Haus Runkel. Haus Runkel was a name. So I was really very lucky. So I stayed in Berlin, and they treated me to the most beautiful events in Berlin. They even had one of the first Berlinales, and I went there. The Hilton Hotel had just been built again in Berlin, and the top of the Hilton had an open bar where you looked, one side you looked into East Berlin, it was all dark. On the other side you looked into West Berlin, it was all bright, And there was a real, like an American bar that was all new, You sat at this big bar outside. I felt terribly. I felt important. I don't know what I felt like. I was so young, it was wonderful. And then from Berlin, then I went home again. And then I thought, gee, I've made money. Why should I work this winter? So Heinz was ready to go skiing. And I said, okay, Heinz, I come with you. And Heinz and we went skiing to St. Anton together. So we went for a few weeks skiing. I never had really, I skied in Bad Wiessee a little bit when I went to the hotel, but not much. I didn't have the time. We had to be in the school all the time. But then in St. Anton, I really learned to ski much better. And it was fun. We went to St. Anton and to Lech, and was another town. And Heinz, of course, had a ball. He met all the most beautiful girls there. And so we had a good time. Then it was time to go home, and Heinz went with me to Munich. And in Munich, we went to Schwabing, right? And then Heinz said to me, I'm going to stay here in Munich, and you can go home alone. Then I was really upset with him, and I said, Heinz, we came together, and I'm not going home alone on a train. I want to go home by car just like you. And for the first time, I really put my foot down with him. I always gave in to everything he wanted. I said, you bring me home. I'm not going on a train home now. I felt like I deserved to be treated better than that. And there came a girl suddenly. She followed. Oh yeah, that was the thing. A girl had followed him to St. Anton, beautiful girl. And that's why he wanted to get rid of me, right? But I insisted that he bring me, and he did bring me home then. And but he went back again. He didn't go back into his office. He went back to skiing or wherever he went, I don't know. Heinz was a big playboy. He was a playboy. So I went home. I stayed another couple of weeks with my mother, and then it was time to go back to Kampen again, because then the season started. You know, by the 1st of April, I wanted to get ready. It was still pretty cool there. I went for walks with Nettie Nunn. We went for walks on the beaches. It was stormy and cold, but I had wanted to get ready for the season, so it was okay. And then I've spent another season in Kampen, and then came a man who said if I had some American experience, and I said no, but he said if you have, he said, I would love to hire you as a directrice in my hotel in Berlin. This man owned like 3 first-class hotels in Berlin. And I thought, oh my God, I loved Berlin. I wanted to go there. And then at the same time, there was another man who always stayed at the hotel. He wanted me to buy a piece of property. And I wanted to do that too. And I had saved all my money. I never spent my money, so I had saved enough money to do that, because he had really connection to old meadows on the other side of the island. And I thought, and they all said, Annette, build your own hotel here, because we need a hotel where the rooms have bathrooms and all that, because Germany was still after wars, it wasn't that great yet, right? And so I thought, I take that job, I go to America, and then either I get a job in Berlin, or I do that with a land and build a little pension or something. So we had a Mr., what was his, Kirchner, I think was his name. He owned the Hamburg-Chicago line, which is a freighters, not you know, ships.
A container freighter ship.
Yeah. So I asked him, because it was expensive for a European to go to America, you know. So I said, do you think I could get a cheap trip to America on one of your ships? Oh, he said, no problem at all. He was so nice, he got me a ticket from Hamburg to Chicago.
So you got a ticket on a freighter,
yeah,
from Hamburg to
Chicago. Yeah.
And what day did you get on that boat to go from Germany to America?
First, I was still in Kampen. I had to go twice to Hamburg to the consulate to get my visa and everything, and they checked you out. Oh my God! I said, in America everybody is a virgin and holy, because the way they had to be, you know. So you had to clean shirt to go to America. So I had to be twice. I was at the consulate in Hamburg, and then finally I went home again, and I packed my suitcase. And my mother was appalled. To America, she says, Annette, you're not going to America, that's for poor people. I said, well, that's okay, Mother, I'm coming back. I only go for a year. I promised her, 1 year, Mother. So she gave in, and I had that big old leather black suitcase, I never forget, it was very heavy. And I packed that thing, put all the things I needed, and I also had a fur coat, which I was so glad I took along. It was a cheap fur, like a lamb, you know. And so the time came, I got all my papers together, and the time came to come, and then my mother and we always had a driver in the factory. My mother always needed a driver. Anton was his name. Anton, mother, and Winnie, all these 3 drove me to Hamburg. And the last night before, on the 9th of October, we had the most beautiful dinner in one of those wonderful restaurants that are out on the Ulster, you know.
Yeah.
We had a lovely dinner there, very fancy dinner. And the next morning, we stayed at the Europa Hotel there. They brought me to the boat. And it happened to be my birthday.
So on the 10th of October, 1959, you got on the boat,
yeah,
to go from Europe to your next adventure to America.
I was exactly 25 years old then.
I think we'd make a break here.
On my 25th
we'll resume Annette's story, her adventures in America.
Yeah. I wish Winnie was alive. She would.
Okay.
She would back me up on all this.
Yeah.